Your drain isn't clogged. At least, not the way you think. Because when most people hear the word clog, they imagine something dramatic. A solid blockage, a thick chunk of hair, a piece of food stuck deep inside the pipe, something completely stopping the water from moving. But that's not what usually happens. Because if your drain was fully blocked, water wouldn't move at all. It wouldn't swirl. It wouldn't slowly disappear. It wouldn't tease you by draining just enough to make you think it's almost fine. It would just sit there. But your water does move. Slowly. Painfully. 1 inch at a time. Just enough to frustrate you every single day. You turn on the tap, and within seconds the sink starts filling. You brush your teeth, wash your hands, rinse a plate, or take a shower, and the water just sits there like it has nowhere to go. Then, after a while, it finally drains. So you think, okay, maybe it's not that bad. And that is exactly where the problem begins. Because most people ignore a slow drain until it becomes a disaster. They wait until the water stops moving completely. They wait until there's a bad smell. They wait until the bathroom sink looks dirty, the kitchen sink backs up, or the shower turns into a little pool around their feet. And by that point, the problem has already been building for weeks, sometimes months. But here's what most people get wrong. They assume it's a clog. So they reach for chemicals. They grab the bottle under the sink. They pour in that thick, harsh liquid. They wait. They flush it with water. And for a short time, it looks like it worked. The water moves a little faster. The panic goes away. And they think the problem is solved. But then a few days later, or a few weeks later, the same thing happens again. The sink slows down. The shower drains badly. The smell comes back. And suddenly, they're trapped in the same cycle again. Same product. Same result. Same frustration. Or worse, they call someone. They pay hundreds of dollars for a problem that keeps coming back. And the reason it keeps coming back is simple. Slow drains usually aren't caused by one big blockage. They're caused by buildup. Layer after layer. A thin film at first. Then a thicker coat. Then a sticky wall inside your pipe that keeps grabbing more and more debris every day. Grease. Soap residue. Hair. Toothpaste. Food particles. Shampoo. Conditioner. Mineral deposits from hard water. All of it slowly clings to the inside of your pipes. Not enough to block the pipe completely. Not yet, but enough to narrow it. And that is the part most people never think about. Your pipe may still be open, but it's not open like it used to be. It's like cholesterol in an artery. The space is still there. The water can still pass through, but now it has to squeeze through a smaller opening. And the smaller that opening becomes, the more resistance the water faces. At first, you barely notice it. Then one day, the sink takes 10 seconds longer to drain, then 30 seconds, then a full minute. Then the water starts rising while the tap is still running. And eventually, you're standing there watching dirty water crawl down the drain like it's fighting for its life. That's why slow drains are so annoying. Because they don't fail all at once. They slowly steal the flow. A little today. A little tomorrow. A little every time you use the sink. And because the change is gradual, most people don't react until it's already bad. Now here's where it gets interesting. Because decades ago, before chemical drain cleaners became common, people handled this problem differently. They didn't try to burn through the clog. They didn't pour harsh reactions into their plumbing. They didn't rely on a product that promised a quick fix. They used a simple method that worked with the way buildup actually behaves. They didn't dissolve the clog. They broke its grip. And there's a big difference. Modern drain cleaners are designed to attack. They use chemicals that heat up, foam, burn, or break down whatever they touch. Sometimes they work. Sometimes they make the water move again. But here's the problem. They often don't remove everything. They just punch a path through the middle. Imagine a tunnel through a pile of sticky grease, hair, and residue. The water can pass through that tunnel for a while so it feels fixed. But the walls of that buildup are still there, still sticky, still rough, still ready to catch more debris, so the problem returns again and again. And every time you pour in chemicals, you're not really cleaning the pipe completely. You're just forcing temporary movement through a dirty pipe. That's why the same drain keeps slowing down. That's why the same sink keeps needing attention. That's why some people buy the same cleaner again and again and never understand why the problem never truly goes away. Because the method was wrong from the beginning. Not your effort, not your timing, not your patience. The method. Because buildup doesn't always need to be burned. It needs to be released. That is the key. Most of the residue inside a slow drain isn't hard like cement. It's sticky, soft, flexible. It clings to the pipe wall like glue. And glue doesn't always dissolve easily, but it can detach. And once it detaches, water can carry it away. That's why this simple trick works differently. It doesn't rely on chemicals. It relies on 3 things. Heat, movement, and pressure. Not dangerous pressure. Not heavy tools. Not anything complicated. Just controlled force at the right moment. Because when heat softens the buildup and pressure moves against it, the residue loses its grip. It breaks away from the pipe wall. It slides. It loosens. It starts moving. And when enough of it releases at once, the drain suddenly changes. You hear that deep suction sound, that low gurgle, that sudden rush. And then the water disappears faster than it has in weeks. That sound is important. Because that sound means the pipe isn't just letting water through, it's clearing itself. Now, this method was common in older homes. Maintenance workers used it because it was cheap, simple, and safe for the plumbing when done carefully. It didn't require expensive products. It didn't require repeated chemical treatments. It didn't require tearing anything apart. But over time, people forgot about it. Not because it stopped working, because it didn't sell anything. You can't bottle it. You can't brand it. You can't put a bright label on it and charge people every month. A solution that works with things people already have at home is not exciting to companies. And a fix that prevents repeat purchases is not a business model. So the industry shifted toward convenience, toward quick fixes, toward products people would buy again and again. And slowly, the old method disappeared from everyday knowledge. But the problem never changed. Slow drains are still slow for the same reason. Buildup. And buildup still responds to the same thing. Heat, motion, pressure. Now let's talk about what is actually happening inside the pipe. When you run warm water, it may soften some grease or soap film, but not enough to remove it. When you run cold water, it often makes grease firmer. That's why kitchen drains can be especially bad. A little oil from dishes, a little butter, a little food residue, a little soap. It all seems harmless because it goes down as liquid. But once it cools inside the pipe, it begins to cling. Then soap attaches to it. Then food particles attach to the soap. Then more grease attaches to that. And suddenly, your pipe has a sticky inner layer that gets thicker every week. Bathroom drains are different, but the idea is the same. Hair doesn't always block the drain by itself. Hair gets caught in soap residue. Conditioner makes it slick. Toothpaste adds thickness. Shaving foam adds more film. Minerals in water make the surface rougher. And once the inside of the pipe becomes rough and sticky, everything passing through has a better chance of getting caught. That's how a slow drain forms. Not from one mistake. From repetition. Tiny things. Every day, again and again. And because you can't see inside the pipe, you don't realize what's happening until the flow changes. That's why this method is powerful. Because it attacks the real problem. Not the symptom. The symptom is slow water. The real problem is a narrowed pipe. And when you restore the pipe's flow, the water moves the way it was designed to move. Fast, smooth, without resistance. And when water moves quickly, buildup has less chance to stick again. That's the part most people miss. A clean pipe doesn't just drain faster. It stays cleaner longer. Because strong flow helps wash away residue before it can settle. Weak flow does the opposite. Weak flow allows debris to sit. It allows film to collect. It allows grease and soap to cling. So every time your drain slows down, it creates the perfect condition for the problem to get worse. That's why slow drains often become slower over time. The buildup reduces the flow. Reduced flow causes more buildup. More buildup reduces the flow even more. It becomes a loop. And unless you break that loop, you'll keep dealing with the same issue. Now imagine doing something simple that breaks the buildup's grip and restores the flow in one attempt. No harsh chemicals, no expensive visit, no guessing. Just a basic method that uses the pipe's own movement to clear itself. First comes heat. The water should be hot enough to soften sticky residue. Not just slightly warm. Hot. Because heat changes the texture of the buildup. Grease becomes softer. Soap film becomes weaker. Residue becomes less attached. It doesn't vanish instantly, but it becomes vulnerable. And that's what you want. Because the second part is movement. You don't want the buildup sitting there softened and then hardening again. You want it disturbed while it's weak. That's where controlled pressure matters. A sudden shift inside the pipe can break the bond between the buildup and the pipe wall. And once that bond breaks, the residue starts moving. That is why timing is so important. Heat first. Pressure second. Water flow after that. When those three things happen in the right order, the drain can change quickly. Sometimes the difference is immediate. Sometimes it takes a second round. But when it works, you can feel it. The water no longer fights to go down. It pulls. It swirls. It disappears with force. And that is the difference between a drain that is barely open and a drain that is actually flowing. Now, some people may hear this and think, why not just use chemicals? They're faster. And yes, chemicals can feel faster. But faster isn't always better, especially when the problem keeps coming back. Because harsh cleaners can be rough on plumbing. They can weaken older pipes. They can affect joints. They can create heat reactions that aren't ideal for certain systems. And if you use them again and again, you may be solving today's inconvenience while creating tomorrow's bigger problem. That's the hidden cost. The bottle may look cheap, but repeated use adds up. And if the drain eventually needs professional repair because the pipe was damaged, the real cost becomes much higher. That's why older maintenance methods focused on preserving the system. They weren't just trying to clear the drain. They were trying to keep the plumbing healthy. Because pipes are designed to last for decades. But only if they're treated correctly. Now think about your own home. How often do people pour things down the drain without thinking? Cooking oil, greasy dishwater, soap foam, hair, toothpaste, tiny food scraps. Even things that seem harmless can become part of the problem. Not because one use destroys the drain, but because daily use creates layers. And layers create restriction. That's why the best fix is not always the strongest one. Sometimes the best fix is the one that understands the problem. You don't always need to attack the drain. You need to restore it. You need to return the pipe to the condition where water can do its job. Because water is actually the most important part of the whole system. A drain doesn't stay clean because nothing ever goes into it. A drain stays clean because water moves fast enough to carry things away. When that movement weakens, everything changes. So this trick works because it brings back movement. It helps the buildup release. Then it lets water flush the loosened material out. And once that happens, the drain doesn't just seem better, it feels different. The sink empties faster. The shower doesn't pool. The gurgling reduces. The smell often improves because old residue is no longer sitting inside the pipe. And the whole system feels lighter. Now here's something important. This is not about waiting until disaster hits. This is about catching the problem early. If your drain is already completely blocked, that may require a different solution. But if your drain is slow, if water still moves, if it drains but takes too long, that is the perfect time to act. Because at that stage, the buildup is still removable. It hasn't become a serious blockage yet. It's holding on. But it hasn't won. That's why the timing matters. Most people wait too long. They wait until the drain stops completely. Then they panic. Then they use chemicals. Then they call someone. Then they pay more. But a slow drain is a warning sign. It is the pipe telling you that flow is being restricted. And if you respond early, you can avoid the bigger problem. Now, there's another reason this method is so effective. It changes how you think about the drain. Most people see the drain as a hole. Water goes in. Problem solved. But a drain is not just a hole. It's a system. A pipe has walls, curves, joints, traps, low points where residue can settle. And every part of that system affects flow. So when buildup collects, it doesn't always collect in one obvious spot. It may coat the walls. It may gather around bends. It may sit in the trap under the sink. It may collect where grease cools down. That's why one chemical pour often fails. Because the problem is not always one object sitting in one place. It's a film, a coating, a pattern of buildup across the pipe.